You've found just stories, simple, heartfelt moments from real lives, stories that remind us how connected we all are through love, loss, and hope. Get cozy. The stories are about to begin. In a small room whose walls were covered in yellow wallpaper with a faded floral pattern, stood two people. A woman of short stature, with strands of gray framing stern features. Her nose resembled a bird of prey's beak, and her lips were thin as threads. A heavy, coarse necklace on her neck trembled with each of her words, sharp, biting, like the crack of a whip. "Willie, don't you understand that our life like this is impossible?" The woman lifted her chin, addressing the man. "She's become a hindrance." The man looked at her, torn between guilt and a barely noticeable glimmer of defiance. His formerly soft features now looked utterly pathetic. His hands hung limply, and his gaze wandered everywhere but met his mother's. "She's my wife, Mom. How can you not realize that?" The woman sharply threw up her hands and snorted like an angry cat. "Oh, don't talk to me about wife. You wouldn't be chasing other skirts if she meant so much to you, and I'm not going to clean up after her anymore. She's a vegetable. Did you hear what the doctor said? She has no more than a year left. What's the point of doing anything at all? I suppose she'll be perfectly fine at her grandmother's house. She'll remember her native land, her childhood." William shook his head vaguely. "Besides, after she's gone, there'll be a decent inheritance that will help us improve our affairs. So—" William looked thoughtfully at his mother and sighed heavily. The next day, all the bags and suitcases with Sarah's belongings, William's wife, stood ready for departure. Eleanor Miller, the girl's mother-in-law, had put them out in the corridor, not hiding a malicious smirk at the sight of her bewildered daughter-in-law. Sarah was a miniature, pretty girl with light hair, confined to a wheelchair. At 27, a sudden stroke had turned her into an invalid. Sarah had lost not only the ability to move but also to speak. Now she sat in her wheelchair almost constantly, immersed in silence. Eleanor Miller looked after her daughter-in-law while William was away at work at the insurance company. At times, Sarah felt that her husband deliberately stayed late just to avoid returning to his helpless wife, who couldn't even get to the bathroom on her own. It should be noted that Eleanor Miller had never felt much affection for her daughter-in-law. She disliked Sarah's ambitions, her desire to achieve a lot. The mother-in-law believed that a girl's place was beside her husband, supporting him, not running around all day on company business where she worked. Sarah held the position of assistant to the general director of a large company. In time, she dreamed of promotion, of a permanent position, ideally, of her own business. However, she had neither the money nor decent opportunities yet. The stroke destroyed the last vestiges of sympathy in Eleanor Miller for her daughter-in-law. If before she had merely tormented the girl with nagging, after the incident she constantly erupted in shouts. She could not stand Sarah's silent requests and often forgot to give her medicine or lunch. Only one thing pleased her. Sarah couldn't speak and didn't prevent the woman from rereading the plays in which she had once shown on the theater stage over and over again. While William struggled to drag the heavy suitcases to the car, Sarah sat opposite the front door, watching the events unfold with silent horror. Her eyes were red. She was close to tears. "Don't worry," Eleanor Miller sneered. "Your doctor said your heart is weak, you won't last long, but the air in the village is good. Maybe you'll live out this year. A little house in the village. Haven't you ever dreamed of going back there?" Thousands of thoughts swirled in Sarah's head, but she couldn't express a single one. Her hands lay limply on her knees. If she could, she would have squeezed the fabric of her sweatpants with all her might, and then burst into a scream, telling her mother-in-law everything she thought about that old gray witch. "Billy, darling, what's taking you so long?" The breathless man climbed the stairs, breathing heavily. It was clear the climb had been difficult for him. He looked at his mother, holding out a hand in front of him. "The lift broke down. I had to drag all this from the 20th floor." Eleanor Miller threw up her hands and shook her head, looking reproachfully at her daughter-in-law. "And I said we should have hired a mover." "Mom, you know perfectly well we don't have the money for that. Once I played in theaters every day, filling halls, And Mikey would come after lectures to watch me, the woman said dreamily. Could I have imagined then that I would have to clean up diapers? Eleanor Miller looked at her daughter-in-law again and fell silent. A neighbor, Vera Johnson, walked past on the landing. Good day, the neighbor nodded. Going somewhere? Eleanor Miller smiled broadly. Vera, hello. Yes, we're taking Sally to a sanatorium for rehabilitation. The doctor said it should help. That must be very expensive. Vera Johnson shook her head. Oh yes, very expensive. But we'll have to tighten our belts, the mother-in-law sighed. We can't leave our daughter-in-law without treatment. She's done so much for us. Vera Johnson said something else and headed towards her apartment. The smile and pitiful expression instantly vanished from Eleanor Miller's face. She turned sharply to her son, frowning. Hurry up before the whole building knows our plans. I told you we should have done this early in the morning. William picked up a suitcase and snorted. Morning? It's freezing cold. It's autumn outside. Do you want me to freeze all my limbs off? The man asked, and without waiting for an answer, left the apartment, leaving his indignant mother behind. William was the only and adored child in the family. Eleanor Miller and Michael Miller had him late in life and doted on him. A law university professor and a dramatic theater star put aside their own affairs, dedicating themselves to raising their son. The result of such overprotection was a frail William, who at almost 40 lived with his mother and held a low-paying job where his boss bullied him and his colleagues disliked him. Almost 40 minutes later, William finished moving all the things and Sarah herself. He seated the girl in the back seat, folding her wheelchair. Tears streamed from Sarah's eyes. She was breathing heavily. Her gaze, full of misunderstanding and faint hope, was fixed on her husband. Sal, calm down, please, the man whispered softly, adjusting the seatbelt. Someone will look after you there. We'll pay her from your money. Of course, Eleanor Miller interjected. William shrugged and nodded. We're not doing very well financially right now, you see. So yes, from yours. You'll be better off there. Sarah looked at her husband with an unwavering gaze, trying to find in his pale face a drop of pity or reluctance to do this. But there was nothing, only constant glances around, as if he was afraid someone would see the crying girl and the man carrying her to the car. The car left William and Sarah's house exactly at noon. Eleanor Miller waved goodbye and went home to reread her worn-out book of plays over and over again, imagining herself on stage, met with applause from admiring art lovers. William sighed, increasing speed. He tried not to look in the rearview mirror, which reflected the swollen eyes of the girl sitting motionless behind him. Sal, you understand I have no other choice, right? The man could have sworn the girl mockingly raised an eyebrow. However, wiping his glasses, he saw only his wife's frozen, stone-like face. My mother is trying for our own good. She's right. I can't constantly look after you. I have work. She's not young anymore, so you'll be better off there. You'll have your own caregiver. You'll return to your grandmother's house, which you remembered so fondly. So... William fell silent again, turning away from her gaze. But he felt it on his back, as if burning through his thin jacket, imprinted on his lungs and making him breathe faster. The journey to the village where Sarah was to live was long. The village turned out to be remote, almost abandoned. Just a couple of streets with a small number of houses, one small shop in the center, and an old medical post, closed several years ago due to lack of staff. The dark blue car stopped with a rattle near a small house with an overgrown garden and a crooked fence. The house itself, at least from the outside, looked quite decent. The garden was full of ancient trees and thick grass, in places taller than the fence. In front of the window stood an old bench on two small stumps, on which someone was lying. While William was taking his wife out of the car, unfolding the wheelchair, and taking out the things, Sarah stared unblinkingly at the silhouette lying near the house of her long-dead grandmother. The girl squinted but couldn't make out who it was. "Brenda!" William shouted. A short woman with short hair got up from the bench with a grumble. Staggering, she approached the gate. Her face was wrinkled and sagging, her hair tangled. There was a large crack on her lip, and an old bruise under her eye. Brenda was dressed in completely mismatched clothes, a yellow t-shirt with English inscriptions, green short trousers, clearly not suitable for the weather, and worn pink shoes with rhinestones. "William Miller!" the woman exclaimed. "You're early," Brenda said with slurred speech. William frowned and turned to his wife. "This is your caregiver, Sadie. Meet her. Her name is Brenda. She'll take care of you now." As if to confirm his words, Brenda nodded and swayed. If Sarah could, she would certainly have rolled her eyes. The situation seemed monstrously absurd and at the same time terrifying. William unloaded all the suitcases from the car, even carried them into the house, and handed Brenda a thin envelope. There was clearly not much in it, but judging by her appearance, even that was enough for her. Then the man stopped in front of the wheelchair and sighed. "Sadie, why are you so unhappy? I'm sure you're smiling inside. It's your childhood home." The man surveyed the overgrown area, the gate that fell apart in his hands, the fresh air, constant care. What else was needed for happiness? Sarah wanted to name a million other things that would make her happy. However, as usual, she remained silent, only glaring at her husband. Each of her glances carried more thoughts than anyone could express in words. William understood this, and a tiny worm of conscience even stirred in his soul. But then his mother's words and the numbers on the bank card came to mind, and the worm quieted down, anticipating the taste of money. William got into the car and waved to his wife through the window. Brenda approached her charge, waving back at the man. "Don't worry, William Miller. Everything will be fine." The man forced another smile, and the car drove away from the ill-fated house, leaving Sarah alone with the empty, overgrown plot and the woman who smelled not only of alcohol, but of everything else that could be found in the village. A year later. "Bill, you seriously haven't visited your wife in—" Eleanor Miller glanced at the calendar. "A year?" She continued in horror. "Are you an idiot, Bill? And who raised you like this? How do you know maybe she died long ago, or, worse, on the contrary, got out of the wheelchair?" William tore himself away from the TV and looked tiredly at the sports match. He had just returned from work and had accidentally mentioned that he hadn't visited his wife once. Eleanor Miller was shocked and indignant. "Brenda calls me every week. Everything is fine there. I take her money every quarter. Calm down." Eleanor Miller snorted, walked over to the sofa where her son was lying, snatched the remote, and turned off the ill-fated box. "When I'm talking to you, you should only look at me," the woman said loudly and with some theatricality, shaking her head with an elaborate high hairstyle. "Brenda, who is that anyway? That drunkard you left to look after your wife? Are you even sure she's looking after her and not drinking away the money I give her? Maybe she hasn't been to see Sarah in ages, while you're lying here watching TV." William felt uneasy. He rolled his eyes, staring at the wall. "You want me to go see her tomorrow? Fine. I'll spend my only day off driving to a remote village to see a half-dead wife. Yes, Mom, you really care about me." Snorting loudly, Eleanor Miller threw the TV remote at her son and left the room, quietly muttering everything she thought about him. The next morning, William packed a few things, took the envelope with money, and got into the car. He looked longingly at the clock face, showing only 8 in the morning. He could still be sleeping, and instead, he was forced to go God knows where, and, most importantly, why. He considered his mother's fears unnecessary. However, he had been accustomed to obeying her in everything, and always since childhood. The journey was long, and, as luck would have it, the radio broke down. The silence in the car, broken only by the rare exclamations of impatient drivers, made the morning even worse. Right at the entrance to the village, a large black truck with a flatbed sped towards the man. It was going fast, clearly knowing the area. Behind the wheel sat a man who looked a few years younger than William. He braked sharply upon seeing the slowly moving city car and quietly apologized, saying he didn't mean to. William waved his hand tiredly, not wishing to argue. The way to the house where Sarah lived was vaguely remembered by the man. He handed the money to Brenda in the district center, where she came by bus specifically for the envelope. William had been to the village itself only 3 times, once when he brought his wife, the second when he was looking for Brenda, and the third when he and Sarah were still dating, and she showed him her childhood home, telling him that first her mother lived there, and then she herself. The dark blue car stopped next to an almost new fence. The grass in the garden was mowed, but had managed to grow quite a bit, as if it had been done a long time ago, and overall the area looked neglected, as if no one had lived there for a long time. William frowned and got out of the car. He carefully opened the gate and called his wife, then Brenda. Silence. No one answered. The man wanted to enter the house, but a huge padlock hung on the door, blocking the way. William tugged at the door, but it didn't budge. He took out his phone and started calling Brenda, but she didn't answer. The man tiredly rubbed his forehead and looked around the area. Brenda's house should have been nearby. He found her very close to Sarah's house. Then it seemed like a great stroke of luck. But now his mother's suspicions didn't seem so senseless. Brenda didn't inspire confidence. However, William somehow still trusted her. Leaving the house's territory, the man headed along the street to find Brenda's house. It looked even worse than Sarah's house. William went inside and held his nose. An unpleasant smell hit his face. It was so strong that William only had the strength to quickly look around the house. Brenda wasn't there, and he quickly rushed outside, breathing deeply the fresh air. Having caught his breath, he raised his head and saw a stout woman with 2 buckets walking by. "William!" he shouted and ran towards her. "Excuse me, do you know where Sarah is?" The woman frowned. "She lived in that house," William pointed. "And Brenda? Brenda, the drunkard who was looking after her?" William nodded affirmatively. "Well, then she's most likely at Sam's place. He lives at the end of the village. She buys moonshine from him. And who might you be?" "Never mind," William waved his hand. "Show me where Sam's house is." "And why not show you?" The woman pointed the way to the local moonshiner's house. Brenda was indeed inside. She was sitting at a huge round table and drinking a yellow liquid that emitted a sharp aroma in all directions. William took Brenda by the arms and led her outside. "Where's Sarah? Who's impudent?" Brenda asked loudly with slurred speech. She seemed to be looking straight ahead but seeing nothing. "Where's my wife, you drunken sot?" "She lives not far from here," Brenda smirked, raising her unruly hand. "And what will I get for it?" William angrily took out his wallet, pulled out a few banknotes, and gave them to Brenda. She, businesslike, counted the money and nodded contentedly. Then she broke free from the man's firm grip and flew back into Sam's house. She came out without the money, but with a large bottle of cloudy yellow liquid. "Let's go." The woman waved her hand and hobbled forward, trying not to fall. William followed. The woman led him beyond the street. They walked for a long time on an empty road. The man thought Brenda was trying to confuse him, and he was about to shout at her. But in the distance, the roof of an unknown house appeared. The closer they got, the more William was surprised by its size compared to the other buildings in the village. It seemed simply huge. 3 floors, a balcony, a huge garden in the backyard. Several cars and agricultural machinery were visible. Brenda stopped not far from the iron gates of the house and pointed straight ahead. "Here you go, sign for it." She nodded so hard her head almost came off and walked away, saying nothing more. William was in shock at what he saw, so he didn't respond to her words. He rang the small bell. A clear, cheerful voice rang out. "Nick, why are you so early?" William was taken aback, freezing in place for a second. "Sarah?" he quietly repeated. The voice on the other side fell silent and then sighed deeply. "We'll come in." The door swung open, revealing a huge garden and a stone path bordered by countless flowers to William. Stepping carefully along the path, William went inside. On the steps of the house stood a short, miniature girl with light hair. She was dressed in a beige suit and a shawl. She looked down at her husband from above. Her face was almost impenetrable, like a frozen mask. "I thought you weren't going to show up," the girl smirked, "but come in, since you're here." William was speechless. He simply walked slowly behind his wife, who was walking confidently through the house. Inside, the house was furnished simply but tastefully. Pleasant colors, beautiful decorations and paintings, soft, clean carpets. One of the doors led to a small office with a computer and a desk piled high with papers. "Oh, don't look there. We've been in a complete mess with papers lately. We need to sort it out properly." William didn't understand anything, but he looked at his wife, who looked even better than before the stroke. Her pale face was covered with a healthy blush. There was gloss on her scarlet lips. Her eyes were lightly made up. Nothing excessive, but it seemed William had never seen such beauty. Sarah led the man into a large room with sofas and armchairs. "I'll make some tea now and we'll talk." Sarah went to the kitchen, and William remained alone in the room. He sat down in an armchair, unable to tear his eyes away from the beauty of the room. Paintings, sofas, flowers, carpets. It all seemed unreal. The man even pinched himself to make sure it wasn't a dream. He couldn't believe it. He expected to see a sick wife in a wheelchair, but before him stood a beauty he had never known. Sarah returned a couple of minutes later with a large tray on which stood several cups of tea. She handed one to her husband, took the second for herself, sitting down neatly opposite him. "Didn't expect this?" she asked quietly. The man shook his head. "I also didn't expect that my beloved husband would send me to die for money. I thought—" "Save your pointless excuses," Sarah requested. "I know everything about you, darling. You're too bad at hiding the truth. It's about my inheritance, of course. When the will arrived from grandmother in Germany, I was incredibly happy, imagining what life we would start, but then I saw something that made me change my mind." "What?" William asked, stumbling over his words. He squeezed the hot teacup as if he felt no pain and looked directly into his wife's face, hoping to see something that would help him understand what was happening. "Remember my friend?" Sarah asked. "Tanya. We worked together at the firm." William nodded. "She's the one who advised me to change my life a year and a half ago." Tall, stately Tatiana sat in an armchair in a small restaurant where their boss had sent them after completing negotiations. "Dinner's paid for. Why not splurge?" Sarah smirked, settling more comfortably opposite Tatiana. Tatiana was Sarah's colleague, working at the same firm. She was several years older and held the position of department head. She always wore strict suits and had very categorical opinions on many issues, especially concerning finances. Sarah opened a small handbag, took out an envelope, and handed it to her friend. "Look, what do you think? Is it real?" Tatiana opened the envelope with interest and read the letter. It was from Germany. "Who is Anna Reuter?" "My grandmother," Sarah replied, "on my father's side. She married a German when my father was about 6 or 7, and they moved there. Then Dad returned to Russia and met Mom. The last time I saw Grandma was at Dad's funeral. She offered me to go with her." "And why didn't you agree?" Tatiana asked in surprise. "Was I supposed to abandon Will? He has his mother here, his job, and I never dreamed of going abroad." Tatiana looked at her colleague with incomprehension. "You're incorrigible, Sal, to trade a good life in Germany for a man." Sarah rolled her eyes. She knew her friend's opinion of her husband perfectly well and preferred not to listen. Tatiana was always very blunt in her statements, which helped her in her career but alienated people. Friends scattered from her directness. "Your Will is ready to sell his own mother for money. Do you even know how much your grandmother left you?" "There was a letter attached," Sarah replied. "She wrote that I was her last relative and she was transferring part of the inheritance to her husband's children, and part to me. Judging by the letter, it's a very decent sum, as well as a small share in an estate in Germany." "Do you need to go there to get it?" Tatiana asked. "There are instructions on what to do. You can accept the inheritance in Russia. The notary will come here himself." A waiter approached with food. The girls ordered a salad and a glass of wine each. "I can imagine how happy Will be. He always dreamed of money, of his own business." "You dream too," Tatiana noted, waving her fork. "And unlike him, you have the opportunity to run it." "Don't talk about Will like that. He's a good person, he's just unlucky." Tatiana laughed loudly. "Yes, and his biggest misfortune is his mother. Not a mother-in-law, but I still don't understand why you live with her if you could move out. Sarah shrugged. Eleanor Miller can't live alone. She's not used to it, and it's not that hard for me to tolerate her. Tatiana grumbled discontentedly and sipped her wine. I don't advise you to talk about the inheritance. They'll either send you to the next world for that money, or they'll start fawning over you and take every last penny. Sarah slammed her palm on the table and looked threateningly at her friend. Will and I love each other. Nothing like that will happen. Don't escalate the situation. You have too bad an opinion of my family. Really? The conversation led nowhere. That same evening, Sarah came home, told the household about the inheritance, showing the envelope. The girl had never seen them so happy before. That evening, Eleanor Miller opened a bottle of expensive wine, and for William, despite their constant economizing, she ordered food delivery to celebrate. Sarah felt that her life was getting better. Several weeks later, Sarah was walking down the street smiling at everything around her. Life at home had indeed improved. Eleanor Miller stopped nagging. William started coming home earlier from work and spending more time with his wife. Sarah was sure that her life had changed for the better and that it would be like this forever. The girl decided to stop by a men's clothing store. She wanted to buy her husband a gift, a new tie. He was tired of all his old ones. Sarah gazed at the display window, noticing nothing around her. Then she turned her head and saw William. She wanted to call out to him, but she noticed a girl walking towards him. The man hugged her and kissed her. From the unexpected blow to her gut, Sarah stumbled and leaned on the display window to keep her balance. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Sarah didn't make a scene. She simply returned home and went to bed early, thinking about what had happened. The next morning, the girl took a day off and went to a local detective agency. A short, thin man in glasses sat at a small table. He was reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. Sarah sat opposite him and explained the situation. What exactly do you require? Everything, Sarah said. How did they meet? How long have they been seeing each other? Their words, actions, meeting places. I want to know everything. The man whistled but said nothing. He seemed surprised by the girl's eagerness but preferred to remain silent so as not to lose a client. For a whole week, Sarah was in a state of limbo. She didn't dare tell Tatiana the truth, not wanting to hear her, "I told you so." But she had to admit, Tatiana was indeed right. It was as if she saw right through William, disapproving of their relationship. She refused to be a witness at the wedding, which deeply offended Sarah. Soon they made up, but the resentment remained. Only now did she begin to understand her friend, who was only trying to reach her. A week later, Sarah sat alone in a small coffee shop, sipping cold coffee. She was reflecting on what was happening. A complete picture wouldn't form in her mind. The girl had always tried for her husband, doing everything he or his mother asked. She had even swallowed her pride, curbing her ambitions. A call interrupted her thoughts. The detective asked her to come in. Throwing a banknote on the table, Sarah grabbed her bag and rushed to the agency. Fortunately, it was not far. She flew inside and sat opposite the man, who, as before, was reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. He raised his head at his client and adjusted his slipping glasses. You know, you're lucky your husband's mistress turned out to be so talkative. Really? Sarah asked, not wanting to hear the answer. But the man nodded anyway. I had to follow her for almost a week, interview her friends, but I found out everything. Her name is Lily Adams. She's 22, a graduate of a pedagogical university. They met your husband a few months ago, on the street, I think. Thank you for the information. What about any facts like videos or... The detective, smiling broadly, reached into a desk drawer and pulled out a huge old dictaphone. Sarah was surprised. She hadn't seen such devices since childhood. It seemed they weren't made anymore. Turning something, the man turned on a loud, sometimes crackling recording. Billy! A clear female voice exclaimed. Is this for me? Oh God, how beautiful! Expensive, probably. Nothing is too expensive for you, William said with a satisfied voice. "Once I open my own business, I can spoil you with trinkets every day." "And when, Billy?" the girl asked again. "You said you don't have money for your business yet?" There were no sounds, but Sarah could have sworn William smiled broadly. "My wife has some. She recently received an inheritance from her grandmother. We'll open a business with her money and live well." "You'll leave her, won't you?" Lily said as if through pouting lips. "As soon as she's no longer useful to me." "Yes," William said loudly. The recording continued. The man and the girl were talking about something. However, Sarah was no longer listening. She was lost in her thoughts, sitting with a perfectly straight back, staring straight ahead. She remembered meeting her husband and how happy she was when he proposed. Sarah was 11 years younger than William. They met when she was finishing her economics degree. He invited her to cozy cafes, walked in the park under the stars, bought tickets to the theater and concerts. Eleanor Miller then seemed very sweet and kind. Sarah, who had recently lost her mother, fell in love with the intellectual family and was ready to marry the not-so-rich and shy William. Tatiana was against it, but Sarah didn't listen. She was absorbed in new feelings. Memories arose in the girl's mind of her and Will choosing his wedding suit, of them sorting through gifts after the ceremony, counting which relative gave more. Then the girl was incredibly happy. She was sure that she would always be like that. Despite the fact that William wasn't at all happy about her dreams of business and career, he, and even more so his mother, wanted a family and children. The girl wasn't ready for that. She wanted more. Now all dreams and hopes of a life together collapsed in an instant. Will, that very Will who never raised his voice at his wife, was discussing how he would open a business with Sarah's money and leave her. It seemed so wild that the girl sat staring blankly at the wall for several minutes. The detective didn't interfere. He had seen worse reactions. This was the most normal. Once, a crazy wife simply broke his window in a fit of rage at her husband. Then it seemed wild, the ultimate degree of disappointment and anger. But now he looked into the girl's eyes and saw all-consuming hatred and pain that even affected him. The man got up and went for water. Sarah drank the water in one gulp, and then remembered her friend's words that William was ready to sell his own mother for money. The girl hadn't believed Tatiana then, but now it seemed true. A plan began to form in the girl's intelligent mind. A malicious grin appeared on her face, and the detective recoiled. He had never seen such an expression. Several months later, William's dark blue car drove away from the leaning fence behind which Sarah remained. Brenda was holding her wheelchair, though she was more holding onto the wheelchair than holding it. As soon as the car disappeared from sight, Sarah stood up. Brenda's eyes widened, looking at her charge, who had simply gotten up from the wheelchair after a stroke. "Brenda, let's make a deal. I'll pay you as much as my husband does, and you won't tell him what you saw." Brenda nodded, stunned, unable to ask questions. She was still holding onto the wheelchair. "Excellent, we'll be great friends. Here's your first payment." Sarah held out several banknotes. "You'll come every month and I'll give you money. You, in turn, must tell your husband that my condition hasn't changed and he doesn't need to come. Clear?" The woman nodded, snatched the banknote, and without saying goodbye, walked away, while Sarah went into the house to change. Inside the old house, everything was dusty. The furniture was covered with fabric. Garbage lay everywhere. One window was broken. Probably children tried to climb in. Sarah approached the old red sofa, threw off the fabric, and sat down tiredly. A cloud of dust rose around her. The girl took out her phone from her pocket, which Eleanor Miller had miraculously not found, and dialed the only number she could trust. "Come, everything happened just as you said. Yes, the house is in the village. I'm waiting." Throwing the phone aside, Sarah lay down. A multitude of thoughts swirled in her head. She was thinking about everything and nothing at the same time. An hour and a half later, when Sarah had already tidied up the house, changed, and prepared food, the door opened, and a tall girl in a strict blue suit entered. In her hands was a small bag, wine and takeout food. "Scrambled eggs don't appeal to me," Tatiana smirked, nodding towards the old, dirty frying pan, covered with such a thick layer of grease that it was probably impossible to wash it off. "It's a good thing you brought wine. I definitely wouldn't have been able to get through this day without it." Tatiana looked around the little house and nodded to her thoughts. Then her gaze fell on a pack of diapers, and she shook her head. "You sat in this. God, this is horribly disgusting." "Yes, I can't disagree. But you know what bothered me more?" Sarah asked, taking dishes out of the cupboards. "What?" Tatiana was wiping the table and arranging the food containers. "Eleanor Miller changed my diaper only once a day. It seemed she didn't notice that I got up and walked around the house. She was so engrossed in her novels that she didn't hear me get up and walk around." Tatiana laughed. "If you'd left the house for a few days, she definitely wouldn't have noticed. The main thing is to put her photo album next to her." "Exactly," Sarah sighed, sitting down at the table. "I still can't believe they left me to die. And they believed a makeshift diagnosis. They heard I didn't have long to live and started rejoicing. How could they possibly doubt the reality of the diagnosis given by Dr. Peter Smith?" Tatiana and Sarah began to eat, thinking about what they would do next. "I'll live here for a month or two until I figure out how to live on. I have zero plans for the future. For the first time in my life, I have no outlines." "And what are you going to do here?" Tatiana asked. "An old abandoned house, an overgrown garden, a remote village. You and such a place are incompatible. If I rush headfirst into this now, I'll definitely fail. It's not the right state," Sarah explained. "You see, I gave up on my dreams of my own business a long time ago. All the groundwork, ideas have been gathering dust somewhere in the depths of the apartment, and it seems to me everything is long outdated. I'll live here, clear my head, maybe I'll come up with something. I haven't had a vacation in a long time." Tatiana shrugged, not knowing what to say to her friend. For the first time, she too was speechless. She didn't like William, not knowing why herself. She acted foolishly by refusing to be a witness. However, she didn't think he was capable of such a thing. She had joked, saying he was ready to sell his own mother. To her, William seemed like a spineless guy, incapable of anything but processing insurance. But he was able to abandon a person to die, and not just anyone, but his wife. It seemed utterly wild. Tatiana spent the first night with her friend in this house and went home the next morning. Sarah quit her job, but she didn't, and she didn't have a rich inheritance from her grandmother. Sarah started the new day with a cold shower. Fortunately, her grandmother's house had water and even gas. Her parents had once installed all the conveniences in her grandmother's house, but soon after, she died, never having managed to fully use them. The cold shower somewhat refreshed her thought-filled head, and Sarah sighed deeply, feeling the icy drops hitting her back. 3 weeks of hell were behind her. She had put her husband to the test. She had hoped to see a drop of care or love, but in the end, she only received hatred and the expectation of a speedy death. This was the worst of all. Therefore, Sarah couldn't quickly return to her former rhythm. Her usual life was over. She needed to shake things up. Taking out the money she had hidden from her suitcase while no one was looking, the girl went to the shop. She vaguely remembered its location and decided to ask the villagers. Fortunately, it was early morning, and everyone was going either to work or to their gardens. It was autumn, cool outside, especially in the morning, and Sarah wrapped herself more snugly in an old coat found in the cupboard. She managed to find the shop even without the help of passers-by. It was exactly the same as 20 years ago. The girl smirked at the sight of the familiar multicolored sign and the murky window through which she could see the counters and a stout saleswoman in a blue apron. Stepping inside, Sarah inhaled the familiar smell of fresh bread and lemonade, which the saleswoman loved. The woman's name was Valerie. When Sarah was little, she was just starting to work there. Now she was probably the manager. "Auntie Val, hello? Do you recognize me?" Sarah asked. The woman thought for a moment. "Something familiar, but I just can't remember." "I'm Margaret Brown's granddaughter. I was here as a child." "Oh, Sally. How could I not recognize you? The woman asked, coming out from behind the counter. She hugged Sarah, kissing her on the cheek. You haven't been here in so long, and nothing has changed here. I noticed. Will you sell me some groceries? Sarah asked, looking at the counters. They were filled with food, although the shop seemed very small. The girl checked the prices and realized they were even higher than in the city. The prices are huge, after all. Valerie spread her hands. Give me a loaf each of black and white bread, a bottle of milk, butter and vegetable oil, a kilogram each of pasta, buckwheat, rice and peas, cheese, sugar, salt, and… Oh, Sally, go to Mrs. Peterson's for dairy. She lives right next to you. And this milk, the woman nodded at the counter. It's shameful to give it even to a cat. Its shelf life is 6 months. Where have you ever seen milk last that long? For vegetables, potatoes, onions, beets, carrots, go to David Green. Everything here is from the local farmer, but it's been sitting here for a long time. Almost everyone in the village has their own gardens, and David Green always sells cheaply. Ask for directions. He's not far from the shop. Valerie fell silent. Her words were interrupted by a bell and a man who burst into the shop. He was dressed in dirty clothes. His face was very serious. He pushed Sarah away from the counter and said loudly, Valerie, give me 2 bottles of mineral water. And there was an order left here for you. A box of medicines and poison for pests. We need to plant before winter soon, and there's nothing to treat with. Nicholas, don't you see there's a customer here? Valerie asked sternly. Nicholas glanced at the girl and waved her off. She's from the city, if she needs it so much. Let her buy it there. I need it urgently. Nicholas! Valerie looked at him sternly. Sarah raised her hand in the conciliatory gesture. Let him go ahead, Auntie Val. He seems to need it more. Valerie looked displeased, went for the box. Couldn't this have waited just a few minutes? The man was tall, dark-haired. His hands were calloused from work, his gaze stern. Sarah hadn't seen such people since childhood. Despite his working, slightly untidy appearance, Nicholas was quite handsome and young. He was clearly over 30, but definitely not more than 40. He looked at the girl, squinting. And is it that important to you? The man asked roughly. I'm not in a hurry, of course, but even in the city, people queue, and believe me, they're in a much bigger hurry there than you are. Sarah smirked and turned away, feeling the piercing gaze of the man's brown eyes on her. Valerie came out with a heavy box and handed it to the customer. Take it, the mineral water is over there. She nodded towards the far corner, where mineral water indeed stood in plastic packs. You'll pay later, right? Nicholas nodded, picked up 2 bottles of mineral water, and left the shop without saying goodbye. Who was that? Sarah asked Valerie. The woman waved her hand and went to the shelf with cereals. Local farmer. He inherited a small house and livestock from his father about 8 years ago. He decided to start a farm, built everything himself, did it, hired workers, makes ends meet as best he can. He wants to plant fields, but for now he only cultivates large gardens and sells produce to our shop and in neighboring villages. He's not a bad guy, just a bit rough. No one knows why. Sarah gathered several bags of groceries and took them home. They were heavy, and she barely made it, but the small refrigerator at home no longer looked so bare. Then the girl went for vegetables and dairy products to the people Valerie had recommended. Although the girl was used to buying everything in the city shop, in the village it was cheaper and better to buy from ordinary people. David Green did indeed live not far from the shop. He had a large plot of land and 2 goats, which bleated loudly at the sight of Sarah. As a child, the girl was afraid of animals, so she avoided them now. In the house, Sarah found an old man who was making some kind of chair. The girl explained the situation and introduced herself. Sally, I'm so glad to meet you, the old man smiled through his thick gray beard. There haven't been young people in the village for so long. You're the first in many years. And Margaret's granddaughter, too. I only remember her daughter, Natalie. Yes, that's my mom, the girl nodded. So, will you sell me some vegetables? I can give you some apples for change, too, David Green smiled. Mine are good, ripe, juicy, and they'll keep well for winter. And for compotes, jam, will you take some?" Sarah smiled happily. However, the smile left her face when she left the old man with 3 huge bags that weighed twice as much as the previous ones. David Green decided to sell her enough produce for a month and a half, apparently thinking the girl would eat only potatoes and beets. Sarah felt awkward refusing, so she sacrificed her back, which definitely couldn't handle the load. After walking just a few steps, Sarah stopped, heavily placing the bags on the ground. A black car with a large flatbed stopped not far from her. "Need help?" Hearing a familiar voice, Sarah looked up and saw Nicholas, examining the girl's bags. Remembering the man's words in the shop, the girl hesitated. She didn't want to ride with a person who didn't know how to be polite, but she also didn't want to drag the huge bags, so she had to swallow her pride again. "Yes, that would be helpful." Nicholas got out of the car and picked up the bags. "You really stocked up? Are you planning to winter here?" "No, I'm making compote, frying potatoes." The girl smirked and picked up a smaller bag, helping load it into the flatbed. Nicholas turned and took the bag from the girl's hands. Sarah felt his warm touch and froze for a second. Then she released the rough fabric and took a few steps back. Nicholas put down the bag and closed the flatbed. "Show me the way. Where should I take you?" "Of course, I'll show you," Sarah said, getting into the passenger seat. "Someone like you from the city here?" "Well, yes," Sarah said thoughtfully. "And what attracted you here?" "I grew up here," Sarah shrugged, "and there were problems at home, and I needed somewhere to be alone. I remembered this little house. I always loved this village. It's quiet and peaceful. Nothing interferes with thinking." "Yes, that's true." Nicholas drove fast. Either he was in a hurry, or it was his personal driving style. However, he wasn't slow only when driving. In the shop or on the street, he also didn't linger, so Sarah decided it was a characteristic trait of his. The bags were unloaded and even carried into the house. Nicholas walked through the grass, which reached his waist. It had already begun to dry, so it rustled loudly underfoot. "Is there really no one to mow it?" Grandma did it herself almost until her death. She knew how to do literally everything, from cutting and sewing to mowing and fixing the roof. And I'm a city softie. "Almost none of the women in our village know how to mow, not even with an electric trimmer. Equality hasn't reached here," he smirked. "You're from the city, right?" Yes, yes, the man replied and looked at his watch. "Look at the time. I need to go." "And what's your name?" "Sarah," the girl introduced herself. "Beautiful name. Nice to meet you, Sarah." "Nice to meet you too, Nicholas," the girl smiled. Nicholas left, leaving the girl alone. Sarah watched the departing car for a long time, trying to understand the motives of this man. The next morning began with a clatter and a strange rustling sound. Sarah, tossing and turning, got out of the creaky bed and went to the window. Outside, in the middle of the overgrown grass, stood Nicholas with an old scythe. The grass was falling in neat rows under Nicholas's movements. It was evident that he was sweating, despite the cool morning weather. Sarah threw open the window and called out to the man. Nicholas looked around, stopping his mowing. He was breathing deeply, looking at the open window and the girl looking at him. Sarah was wearing only a long linen dress she had found in the cupboard and decided to use as a nightgown. After cleaning the house and cooking, the girl was quite exhausted. She had no time left to unpack, so she put on what she found in her grandmother's cupboard. "What are you doing?" Nicholas raised his eyebrows, silently expressing his opinion of the foolish question. "I understand you're mowing, but why are you doing it at my house?" "Do you want me to stop?" Nicholas asked, looking at the girl a little mockingly. Sarah shook her head and closed the window, not wishing to continue the conversation. Besides, she had noticed the man's gaze. He was clearly looking her over. To avoid a repeat of such situations, the girl changed clothes and went to the small kitchen. Sarah decided to make pancakes. Of course, she never got up this early and didn't want to cook anything. Moreover, the fast-paced city rhythm had taught her not to eat breakfast. but she had to feed the unexpected helper who had decided to come to her house early in the morning and work. When Nicholas finished, which was clear from the cessation of the scythe sound, the pancakes were already ready. Sarah was just frying the last one. The girl went out onto the porch and called to her helper. "Come in for breakfast." The man shrugged, put down the scythe, and entered the house. He was all sweaty and tired. "You can use the shower." Sarah nodded towards the bathroom and went to the kitchen. Nicholas didn't take up the hostess's offer. He only washed his face. He came to the kitchen and sat down at the table. A plate of pancakes with sour cream was in front of him. Sarah stood next to the table, her arms crossed over her chest. "How much do I owe you?" Nicholas raised his eyebrows questioningly. "Well, you didn't do it for free, did you?" "For the food," the man smirked and took a bite of a pancake. Leaning back in his chair, he looked directly into the girl's eyes, as if wanting to read something in them. "Well, if you don't want to accept payment, I won't insist," Sarah shrugged. "I'm used to any work being paid for." "And haven't you heard of help in the city?" Sarah snorted and laughed. "You yourself said you're from the city. Auntie Val told me you've lived here for 8 years, which means you can't reproach me." "I'm not reproaching you, it's just that city people are always surprised when they're helped for free. I used to be like that too." "And why aren't you eating, by the way?" Nicholas asked, tilting his head. He looked at the girl with interest. "I don't eat breakfast," the girl waved her hand. "I always had to go to work early. I'm not used to it. I usually had a snack at work." "And what did you do?" Nicholas asked, tilting his head. "Assistant to the general director of a firm." Nicholas whistled and smiled. "It's surprising that after that you ended up here." He gestured around the small house with faded wallpaper. "Don't think I was raking in money with a shovel, only with a child's spade, a very small one. But I liked it. I was learning about running a business, and I had a dream. Then I had a stroke," the girl chuckled. "But I'll tell you that story some other time. I need to clean up the house and the attic today. Besides, my friend promised to come in the evening. A busy life, you know." Nicholas smiled back at her words. "I should go too, anyway." Nicholas finished his breakfast and left Sarah's house. She again watched him leave with a long gaze, trying to understand this man's motives. Tatiana arrived that evening. She brought some things Sarah had asked for. Tatiana whistled, seeing the mowed and tidied yard. She put down the bags and called her friend, who was wiping the murky windows at that moment. "I need to replace a pane of glass. Where do you think I can find a handyman?" she asked without greeting her. Tatiana smirked. "Ask the man who mowed the whole yard for you." "That was Nicholas, the local farmer. He gave me a ride yesterday. I don't think he has time for glass." Sarah waved her hand. "Well, he found time for the grass," Tatiana shrugged. "What farmer?" Sarah stopped rubbing the glass. She invited her friend into the house. "If you don't mind, peel the potatoes. They're under the sink. I can't do anything else. I'm tired." Sarah sank into a chair and wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. Tatiana took off her jacket and picked up a knife. "So what about the farmer?" I didn't know him before. He moved here 8 years ago. My grandmother died around that time. He keeps a farm. He has various animals, gardens. What else can I say about him?" "Is he rich?" "Tan!" the girl reproached. "What?" Tatiana retorted. "It's very important nowadays. Well, okay. How do you feel about him as a man?" Sarah thought for a moment. "I don't even know. He's kind of ambiguous. First he was rude to me in the shop, and then he decided giving me a ride was a good idea. And he even came early in the morning to mow the grass, although I didn't ask him to. And then he refused to take money." "Maybe he likes you?" "Don't be silly," Sarah waved her hand. "He sees me as a city simpleton as far as I can tell. Take a closer look at him. Maybe for once in your life you'll have a normal man who knows he's a man." Sarah rolled her eyes but said nothing to that. "How are things at work?" "Oh, don't ask. Without you, our boss has gone completely off the rails. He's already changed his assistant 3 times. He can't do anything. It turns out you did more than we all thought." Sarah had been living in the village for a month now. She had gotten used to the small house and quiet life, and she had also gotten used to resting, and it terribly annoyed her. The girl had worked her whole life. She grew up in a not-so-rich family and started working right after studying. She didn't take days off without special reasons and always came to work on time. And now she had been doing almost nothing for a month. Yes, Sarah spent the first week on the house, trying to bring it into a livable condition, scrubbing everything clean. But then came silence and peace. The girl woke up late, read books brought by Tatiana, visited the old women, and listened to their stories from their youth. Moreover, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she constantly ran into Nicholas. On the day Tatiana visited, he overheard the conversation about the glass and came the next morning to replace it. Sarah fed him pancakes. Then he fixed the gate, and the girl again made him breakfast. This happened several more times and became a habit. Sarah was no longer surprised by the early clatter outside and the presence of a man under her window, and Nicholas, as usual, came into the house and sat down at the table. There were almost no long and meaningful conversations between them. He didn't give her flowers, didn't pay compliments. He just was. He was there. It seemed very strange. Sarah desperately wanted to understand his motives. "Confess, Nicholas, do you just come here to eat?" "I didn't say that," the man smirked, turning away from the dripping tap. Most of their conversations were like this, short, lacking substance, and usually joking. Rumors circulated in the village, and some girl from the farm even came to Sarah, threatening her. "Nicholas is mine, understand?" the curvy brunette said menacingly. "Do you think you came here from your city and can snatch our men? Well, tough luck." The stranger angrily tore a leaf from a tree and threw it at the bewildered Sarah, who was standing on the porch. When Nicholas came the next time, she told him about the admirer. "Were you scared?" The man smirked, but there seemed to be a hint of seriousness in his words. "I haven't been scared of village women yet. I've been threatened by big-grown men when I worked at a large firm. Once, instead of my boss, I refused to sign a contract with one firm, and they almost beat me right there. 5 grown men in suits, and I was alone. That's scary. Not a leaf thrown by some crazy admirer of a person who, for some reason unknown to me, fixes everything that breaks in my house." Nicholas smiled and fell silent. "You're not very talkative, are you?" The man nodded. "Maybe we should switch to you, then? We don't seem to have that big a age difference." Nicholas agreed to the girl's suggestion and returned to his borscht. Sarah smirked. It was the first time she had seen a man who didn't want to talk. One day, Sarah was walking around the village. Nicholas hadn't visited her for a long time, and she assumed he had gotten bored. She went for a walk to clear her head, and somewhere deep down, she hoped she would meet Nicholas along the way. For some reason, she really wanted to see him again. She had become so used to his strange silence that she almost missed it. The only thing the girl encountered in the village were men running back and forth. They were talking about something. Sarah approached Valerie, who had come out of the shop and was looking somewhere in the distance with concern. "Auntie Val, what happened?" The woman put her hand to her face. "Oh, Nicholas's farm is falling apart. Something's wrong there, some problems. Our men and women are completely upset they might lose their jobs. And where else can you find work in our village? Oh, what a disaster. Nicholas always barely stayed afloat, managed as best he could, but now something has gone completely wrong." Sarah frowned and looked into the distance. "Could you tell me the way to Nicholas's farm?" Valerie explained how to get to Nicholas, to his workplace. His farm was at the very end of the village. It was a large, long building from which the lowing of cows could be heard. Here and there, women in aprons walked and carried buckets. There were men in the backyard. Behind the farm were large, cultivated gardens. Now, in mid-autumn, they were empty. Sarah asked a passing woman where Nicholas's office was and went there. The man's office was small, even tiny. In the middle stood a table and a chair. In the corner a cupboard and a small window in the wall, through which crumbs of light entered. Nicholas himself stood in the middle of the office, bent over papers. He was muttering something with his lips, calculating on a calculator, and making corrections to documents. Sarah approached closer. "Nicholas, hello." The man turned sharply and sighed. "Did something break again?" he asked. "Sorry, now isn't the best time." "No," Sarah replied. "I heard you have problems. I came to help." "Something with the documents? Everything's fine, I'll manage," the man said a little roughly, and she stepped closer and almost pushed Nicholas aside, taking hold of the papers. The man exhaled loudly. "Go away or I'll have to drag you out of here by force." Sarah raised her hand and looked closely. She had only glanced at the papers, but she already saw huge sums and exorbitant expenses that were simply unnecessary for this small place compared to the city. "Do you even have an accountant or a financial specialist?" "I can handle it all myself," Nicholas repeated. "I see how you're handling it. Exorbitant expenses going nowhere. You urgently need a specialist." "And where am I supposed to get one?" Nicholas asked gloomily. Sarah smiled broadly and pointed to herself. "I'm an economist by education. Besides, I worked for several years at a firm where the expenses and income were clearly higher than yours." Nicholas waved his hand and sat down on the chair tiredly, leaving Sarah with the papers. Late in the evening, when it was already dark, Nicholas and Sarah left his office. The farm was empty. The workers had cleaned everything up and locked up. "Are you sure that if you cut these expenses, nothing will change? Why do you need both cold storage and milk delivery 3 times a day? Once is enough, they'll take it away, and the rest of the time it will be stored in the refrigerator. There's no point in running cars and spending huge amounts of money on this. And it's the same with many expenses. The estimates are very poorly drawn up." Nicholas scratched the back of his head in confusion. "I was actually in the military. I'm far from estimates accounting. My father just always dreamed of having his own big farm and fields, but I decided to fulfill his dream, even if it's late." "Late? He died?" "Thank God, no. He got seriously ill. I had to put him in a special institution. Otherwise, I simply wouldn't have been able to cope with him. So I had to raise the farm from its knees." Sarah looked at Nicholas sympathetically, walking along the narrow path. It was cool outside. The wind was blowing. But at the same time, it seemed that things couldn't be better. So calm and quiet. "So, what's the story with the stroke?" Nicholas asked unexpectedly. Sarah flinched. At first she wanted to make a joke, but then she remembered she had promised to tell him. Exhaling loudly, she began her story. "That's when I came up with that plan." She remembered the conversation with the detective. Sarah and Tanya helped put it into action. She found a doctor who, for a small fee, agreed to say that I had a stroke and would die soon. They believed it quickly, as if without hesitation and expecting it. It was terrible. The 3 weeks I lived with my husband and mother-in-law completely wiped out any pity or sympathy I had for him. I became forgotten and useless to anyone. And when he brought me here, I knew it was the end. Nicholas took the girl's hand and squeezed it tightly. Sarah looked at the hand the man was holding and nodded as a thank you for the support. "Why don't you go back to the city?" "At first I just wanted to calm down and wait a bit, but then I realized I didn't want to go back there. It's such a fast pace, constant rushing around. Besides, it's another reminder of Will and his mother." Nicholas let go of the girl's hand and sped up. "Let's go, I'll show you something." They walked for a long time. Sarah didn't know where. However, when they arrived, she gasped in surprise. The man had led her to a huge, luxurious house with a high fence. "This is the house of a friend of mine. We served together. He recently died of cancer. Now the house is being sold. And I don't want it to be. I wish I could buy it, but as you know, I don't have the money. They're going to buy the house to demolish it and build something like a sawmill here, or I don't even know. You understand that if you buy this house, there will be no turning back?" "I don't want to go back to the city. For the village, I'm too fast, impatient. For the city, I'm too slow. It's a paradox. Here I can achieve something, but not there." Sarah fixed her gaze on the man's stern face, on his eyes that looked at the house with hope, on his tightly compressed lips, and on the wrinkles on his forehead that appeared when Nicholas was thinking about something serious. A determined spark lit up in Sarah's eyes. She squeezed Nicholas's hand, just as he had done a few minutes earlier, and smiled. "You will definitely succeed, I'll help. We'll raise the farm, and you'll be as your father dreamed, I promise." Nicholas didn't answer again, but the hope that flickered in his eyes made her happy. He believed in the best. Nicholas and Sarah began working together. She helped him raise the farm, create new working conditions. They bought new livestock and equipment. Profit began to appear not only on paper. The man was very happy about this. He gave the girl flowers several times as a thank you, and the tradition of fixing Sarah's house also returned. He came almost every morning, and she made breakfast. It was their ritual. Several weeks after the walk, Tatiana visited the girl and brought documents. "Are you sure?" she asked her friend. "More than sure," Sarah replied and took the folder. "There's no turning back," Tatiana repeated Sarah's own words. "I know, and I'm ready to take the risk." Tatiana remained silent, not wanting to argue with her friend. After what had happened, she tried to support her in any endeavor. Sarah pressed the documents to her chest and headed towards the farm. More equipment was supposed to arrive today, so the girl hurried as much as she could. Besides, she had happy news. The girl found Nicholas in his office as usual. He was sitting at his desk, writing something. At the sight of the girl, he smiled and brightened up. "You're early," he said, pulling out a chair for Sarah. The girl sat down at the table and placed the papers. "Read this." Nicholas took the folder and began to slowly turn the pages. With each page, his eyes grew wider and wider. The girl watched his reaction with hidden fear and anticipation. Closing the folder, Nicholas put it on the table and lowered his eyes to the girl. "What have you done?" he asked hoarsely. "Did you buy the house?" Sarah nodded and sat down on the chair tiredly. She sat directly opposite the man, tilting her head back and looking straight into his eyes. "You didn't want it to be demolished. It was your friend's house, and I promised you would succeed." "That's a lot of money," Nicholas exhaled. "It's my money. I do whatever I want with it. Besides, I like the village and—" Nicholas's kiss interrupted Sarah's train of thought. "Is this how you decided to get the house?" Sarah smirked when Nicholas pulled away. "Is that what you think of me?" he asked hoarsely. "No," the girl breathed out. "I bought this house for us if you want us to be together. I think I've fallen in love." The man kissed the girl again. "Me too," he replied, gently hugging Sarah. The present. William sat opposite his wife, unable to believe her story. His hands lay limply on his knees, and his eyes stared straight ahead. He wasn't trying to see anything. He just couldn't turn his head in surprise. "You mean you made all this up to test me?" Sarah looked at him sadly and sipped her tea. There was a knock at the door. Tatiana entered in a form-fitting blue dress. She looked directly at William and smirked. "Well, did you tell him everything? It's a shame I couldn't see his face. I was a little late." "So you knew everything?" William roared. Tatiana smirked. "He was my doctor, whom I paid for the diagnosis. Did you really think Sarah did all this alone? She loved you too much to do that. But you broke her heart, decided you could treat her like garbage." William pressed his lips together. "You don't know anything, Sarah. I love you, Sarah." Sarah raised her eyebrows, smirking. "And Lily, does she not satisfy you anymore? Or couldn't she wait until you open your business and shower her with gifts?" William opened his mouth to object, but at the last moment fell silent, realizing that excuses were useless. "But how dare you play such a trick on Mom and me?" William asked. "She was so upset when she found out you were sick." Tatiana and Sarah exchanged glances and laughed. Eleanor Miller was running ahead of everyone, shouting with joy that her daughter-in-law was sick and would kick the bucket soon. "She was waiting for my inheritance more than you were." William looked around the house, then smiled broadly. "Did you buy and earn all this while married to me?" Tatiana frowned, understanding what her friend's husband was getting at. She wanted to object, but he opened his mouth again. "And since you acquired this during our marriage, half of the property is mine, right?" Tatiana was a lawyer. She knew the law perfectly well and how such situations ended. Sarah stood up from the armchair and looked at her husband angrily, wanting to tell him everything she thought of him. But at that moment, the door opened, and the very man from the car that had cut off William entered. "Hi, Nick." Tatiana nodded and whispered something in the man's ear. He turned to William with a very serious, enraged face. It seemed almost impossible to stop him. He advanced on the man. William swallowed in fear and began to retreat. "Get out! If you idiot decide to threaten Sadie, I'll make your life hell," Nicholas said roughly, grabbed William by the scruff of the neck, and threw him out of the room. Tatiana, Sarah, and Nicholas heard the front door slam. William was walking away from the house quickly. "Why did you let him in?" Nicholas asked Sarah, approaching her and hugging her from behind. In front of her husband, she had held herself together, not wanting to show weakness. But everyone in that room knew how difficult it was for her to endure her husband's betrayal. The girl stood with her head bowed low, holding back the urge to cry. "I had to tell him everything," the girl said. "I needed to see his face when he realized my inheritance wasn't coming to him." "Did it make you feel better?" Tatiana asked. Sarah nodded and wrapped herself more tightly in Nicholas's strong and reliable embrace. "I'm filing for divorce tomorrow." Despite Nicholas's threats, William still decided to sue for divorce with property division. From a legal standpoint, he was right. If he had tried to claim the inheritance, he would have been wrong. But the girl had bought the house and leased the fields, the income from which was considered jointly acquired property. The court notification arrived by mail. Nicholas brought it with the other documents and handed it to the girl grimly. When Sarah opened the envelope and read the summons, she turned pale in a second and sat down on the sofa tiredly. She was all dirty and dusty, having just come from the fields, but she didn't care. She hadn't thought William would actually sue for property division. However, she had also thought he wouldn't abandon her to die. He turned out to be a very unpredictable person. "We need a good lawyer," Nicholas said, picking up the notification. "Tanya," Sarah said. "She heads the legal department at the firm. She has a license to handle cases. I think she can help us. Besides, we don't need to tell her our story." Nicholas sat down next to the girl. "Listen, I looked in the bathroom after you yesterday and—" Sarah looked at the man in fright. "I don't know what to say, and I found a test there. Are you pregnant?" Sarah nodded. "I didn't know how to tell you. I thought you'd be against it and—" A soft kiss interrupted the girl. She hugged the man and smiled broadly. "So you're not against it?" The joyful smile, the man's mischievous eyes gave a better answer than any words. He hugged the girl tightly and pressed her to him. "If that scoundrel suddenly decides to sue you for half the property, I don't care. We won't be left with nothing. We'll have our house, the fields, a child, and ourselves. We'll have each other." Sarah closed her eyes and sighed deeply. But when she opened them, Nicholas saw the look that had once frightened the detective. It was a determined and unwavering gaze. "He went to court to take from me what belongs to me by blood, but he will leave there with nothing. I will take not only what is mine, but everything he has. He will be left with nothing." The court hearing took place very soon, as if the universe itself wanted to finish with this strange case quickly. Tatiana became Sarah's lawyer. Nicholas supported the girl from the witness bench, as did many villagers. The judge was a tall, red-haired woman with a stern gaze. She listened to the plaintiff William's statement with boredom, asking clarifying questions that he couldn't always answer. It seemed to amuse her. The witnesses for the plaintiff were Eleanor Miller, neighbors, and William's friends. They all spoke only bad things about the girl. Eleanor Miller even went on and on as if it were her last time, putting on her full dramatic flair. "I was so frightened when Sally, and when she had the stroke. I didn't sleep for 3 nights, waiting for news from the hospital." Tears streamed from the woman's eyes. She wiped them with a white handkerchief and continued. And when I saw Sally, I myself almost had a heart attack. She didn't move. She was almost lifeless. I had to take care of her while Billy was working. I cleaned up after her, fed her, and she wasn't sick after all. The worst thing I could ever experience has already happened to me. My son and I have been betrayed, deceived, and now they want to leave us with nothing. Eleanor Miller cried again and sat back down on the bench. The judge, after her speech, seemed to get into the case and listened to the other witnesses with interest. Your Honor, one should not believe the words of the plaintiff and his witnesses. To begin with, the defendant has evidence of the plaintiff's infidelity. The recording is attached to the case. The recording of Lillian Williams' conversation boomed throughout the courtroom. Then the detective testified as a witness, talking about the plaintiff's relationship. Lies! Eleanor Miller jumped up from the bench, but after a warning from the judge, she sat back down. She seemed deeply distressed by the slander. Furthermore, I would like to note that the defendant did not deceive the plaintiff legally. She merely pretended to be sick to test him. No medical certificates were provided. The doctor only verbally gave the patient's diagnosis to the plaintiff and his mother, and the plaintiff's side claims to have taken care of the sick defendant, Tatiana continued. However, I have a recording of a conversation between Ms. Eleanor Miller and her son. Please play it. Yes, Billy, feed her. Oh, I got so engrossed in reading I completely forgot. But it's okay. She can wait until lunch. She won't lose weight. How are you doing there? Did you find a caregiver for her? Good. The main thing is she doesn't charge much, and it's okay that she drinks. The doctor said she wouldn't last long anyway. The conversation ended, and the courtroom gasped in surprise. Tatiana continued. Furthermore, the plaintiff has filed a petition for the division of the following property: a residential house at the address Ilinskaya Village, Rapina Street, House 8, as well as income from the fields of the Golden Birch firm, which were indeed purchased by Ms. Sarah Miller, the defendant, but this property was transferred to the full ownership of Mr. Nicholas Gorloff a week before the claim was filed. Consequently, the property was acquired during the marriage and also given away during the marriage. Therefore, the plaintiff cannot demand its division. The remaining money in the defendant's personal account and the share in the estate in Germany are part of the inheritance, to which the plaintiff also has no right to claim. The judge smirked. She did it almost imperceptibly, but Sarah could have sworn she looked at William with a hint of pleasure. To transfer the property to Nicholas's ownership, they had to work hard and find a corrupt notary who concluded the deal retroactively. This greatly helped the case. Well then, thus the claim is considered invalid, the judge asked Tatiana. The claim of Mr. William Miller is aimed at the equal division of property between the former spouses, but this is not only the defendant's property, but also the plaintiff's own property, namely, a 3-room apartment at the address Pegasova Street, House 24, third entrance, Apartment 33, a BMW car, as well as the money in the joint account of the plaintiff and the defendant. I object, William's lawyer, a stout old man with a bald head and round glasses, jumped up. The apartment is the plaintiff's inheritance from his father, correct? Correct, Tatiana nodded. But according to the law, if one spouse has made significant changes to the other spouse's property, it can be recognized as joint property. And what significant changes were made? The lawyer asked. Now on the screen, Your Honor, you will see pictures of the apartment before its renovation. As you can see, it was in sufficient condition. This was exactly 1 year after the wedding, and here are pictures of the apartment after renovation, 6 months later. How will you prove that this was done with the defendant's money? Firstly, during the period from September to April, when the renovation took place, the plaintiff was not working, and, according to the bank statement, there was not the necessary amount of money in his personal account. Furthermore, the testimony of the foreman of the renovation team is attached to the case. The contract was concluded in the defendant's name. The lawyers argued for a long time, called witnesses, and tried to prove their point of view, but soon the judge retired to deliver the verdict. She returned with a large red folder. All rise, court is in session, the judge's assistant said. The court delivered a decision to satisfy the plaintiff's claim. The property of Mr. William Miller will be divided between him and his wife. 1/3 of the apartment goes to the defendant, the car becomes jointly owned, and 50% of the money from the plaintiff's account goes into the ownership of Ms. Sarah Miller. The court's decision is rendered and is not subject to appeal. The gavel's strike resolved everything. William and Eleanor Miller looked with anger and hatred at Sarah, whom Nicholas was hugging. Tatiana, smiling broadly, joined them. "I told you we'd take everything from him," the girl said in a slightly strange, even possessed voice. "It's rightfully yours, not his," Nicholas breathed out. "Understand? Now you and I have everything we dreamed of." The man smiled. "All that's left is to have a child, and the house will be full," Tatiana said, gathering her papers. "Well?" Sarah stretched out and looked at her belly. Tatiana smiled. "Quickly, indeed. Will you make me the godparent?" "Do we have a choice?" Nicholas asked. "None." Sarah smiled and hugged the two most precious people in her life again. Now everything would definitely be fine for her.